Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Kegabine at the Garland County Library. I'm here today with Jerry Butler, who's an officer of the Garland County Audubon Society, and this is the second program in his ongoing series, A Bird and a Book, where every month or two or three, we're going to take a look at a book and reflect on the different birds that can be found in that book. Today's book is actually the Bible. And I just got to give a disclaimer here. Of course, the Garland County Library doesn't endorse any particular church or specific version or edition of the Bible. That this is purely a secular look at the symbolism of those birds. Welcome, Jerry. It's good to see you again.
Hi, Paul. It's good to be here again.
As always. Thanks for joining us. And I'll go ahead and let you take over and talk to you here soon.
Okay, well, it's good to be here again. You know, the last time we met, it was a cold day, but it's really pretty today here in Hot Springs. And I looked out at my bird feeder this morning and I saw a bird that I don't see very often. I saw a catbird. A lot of people don't know what a catbird is. It's not just a saying we have. There's truly a catbird, and there was a catbird on my feeder this morning. A catbird is a bird that we see sometime. It's a little gray bird. There's a lot of birds and animals mentioned in the Bible, but you know, a lot of birds in the Bible, but there's a lot of animals in the Bible, but a cat is not one of the animals mentioned in the Bible, but there are a lot of birds mentioned in the Bible. I'm excited about talking about the Bible and excited about talking about the birds in the Bible. I noticed that Paul introduces our program as a bird and a book, and I always think of it as a book and a bird. But no matter what you think of it, we do talk about a book and we talk about a bird. And today, of course, we're going to be talking about the birds and the Bible. Now, I'm not really an ornithologist. I don't purport to be a scientist of ornithology. I'm just a bird watcher. I'm a person who enjoys looking at birds, and I look at it. Nor am I a theologian. I don't know a lot about the Bible. I learned about the Bible like many of you did, just going to Sunday school. When I was a boy, there was a program on the radio. Bob Bice read out of Hurlburt Stories of the Bible. And I read the other day that Bob Bice's Stories of the Bible was the longest running radio show in radio history in the state of Arkansas. And that program was called Bob Reads from the Bible. And interesting, it was sponsored by Myers Bread. It was a 30-minute program every Sunday morning. And Myers Bread was a company that was owned by a Jewish family. And I thought it was interesting that Mr. Bice, who was a main man on the program, was a well-known Baptist, but his program was sponsored by a Jewish family. And that's sort of the way our program is going to be today. It's not really a religious program. It's just a look at the Bible as a literature and as history more than anything else.
Hey, Mr. Butler.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you hit that from beginning tab so we can see your slideshow in a larger size up there at the top?
Oh, yes.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. There you go. And so we'll be looking at a bird in the book, and we'll be looking at the birds of the Bible. And I'm not an ornithologist nor a theologian. As we go through this, I would like for you to begin thinking, what bird do you think is the most frequently mentioned in the Bible? If we're going to have a time, I don't know how many people are watching this program live. Most people will be watching a re-recording of it, but if you're watching it live, you can begin thinking. Maybe you can text Paul and the library and See if you can guess what bird appears the most frequently in the Bible. And all of the programs we will have, the one we had before this one, when we talked about Audubon's famous book, Birds of America, we had a local artist who talked about it. And in the future, we'll have local experts too. I tried to get some of the faith leaders from our community to come and be on this program, but this is a busy time for them. You know, today is Good Friday, and a lot of them have their services going today, and I was unable to get a good representation of a lot of those people, but I'm hoping if we do this program again that we can incorporate some of our religious leaders to comment on what symbolism they see in the birds in the Bible. And if we do this again, perhaps we can add those features to our program. You know, in the Bible sort of accidentally talks about some things about biology. There are 9 insects of the Bible, but since the Bible is not really a scientific work, it uses a lot of different names. Those 9 different insects are called by 98 different names because the Bible was written in a couple of different languages by different authors, and they use different names. There are 98 different names to use for those 9 insects. For example, it calls the same insects both locusts and grasshoppers. We're unsure exactly which one they're exactly talking about. The Bible talks about 17 different fishes and 23 different animals. It has 36 different trees, and it has 38 different species of birds, and it has 89 different plants exclusive of the trees. I was putting this program together. I thought maybe our local garden club ought to do a program about the plants in the Bible. That would be kind of interesting. I recall a few years ago there was a church of some stripe over in Memphis that had a garden, and in that garden you could go through and you could see all of the plants that were mentioned in the Bible planted in that botanical garden they had there where their church building was. But we're going to be talking about the birds of the Bible. As I mentioned before, the last book we took was Birds of America by James Audubon, and the Bible is sort of different than Birds of America. The Bible is actually a collection of 66 books in both the Old and the New Testament, and Birds of America is 5 volumes. It's not really a single book. The Bible had 40 authors, but Birds of America only had a single artist. The Bible has probably been published more Bibles than any book ever, and it's more available. If you were to knock on doors here in Hot Springs, it would probably be hard to find a house that didn't have a Bible, and many of them would have 3 or 4. And whereas the Birds of America is probably one of the most expensive book ever, one selling for $14 million. Bibles are given away by the thousands every day. The Bible was written over a period of 1,500 years, and Birds of America was drawn over a period of 20 years. The Bible has influenced 3 world religions, and Birds of America influenced the world of ornithology and the world of art. The Bible sort of tries to address all of the birds in the world, but the Birds of America addresses only American birds. 38 species of birds are talked about in the Bible. The Birds of America talks about 300 different species of birds. There are no pictures of birds in the Bible, of course, but Birds of America had 435 pictures, and the Bible has more than 700,000 words, but Birds of America has around 300,000 words. So the Bible is a book of words, and the Birds of America is a book of pictures. So we'll be looking a bird watcher's look at the Bible. The first mention of birds in the Bible is in Genesis 1:20, and the fifth day of creation. It says, "Then God said, let the waters abound in abundance of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth and across the face of the firmament of heavens." And that's the first mention of birds. All of the photographs that you see in today's program are photographs that I've taken. I hope you enjoy the photographs. This is a flock of geese, and when the Bible says that there was an abundance of birds and living creatures early in the earth's development, that's certainly true. There are a lot of birds on our planet, and there were many more years ago than there are now. Birds are mentioned 300 times in the Bible, and as I said earlier, 38 species of birds are mentioned by name. Just for comparison, Arkansas has 300 species of birds. They're here in Israel, the nation of Israel, where the Bible was, for the most part, written. It has 300 species of birds. So the nation of Israel actually has many more birds than we have in Arkansas. And so you could see that because Israel is situated in the world where it's a flyway between two continents, the continent of Africa and the continent of Asia, and a lot of birds flew across there. And even today, if you would go there, the birding community in Israel is very active, and people visit Israel to see birds because it's a good place to see a variety of birds. There are 9,000 species of birds on the planet, and there are 300 billion individual birds on the earth. So when the Bible says that God created an abundance of birds, that's really a correct statement. There are a whole lot of them. As we talk about the birds in the Bible, we're going to sort of divide it into three sections. We're going to talk about the birds as actors in the Bible stories, and then we're going to talk about birds as symbols to remind us to do good things, and then we're going to talk about birds as symbols of the deity. First, let's talk about birds as actors in Bible stories. One Bible story I'm sure you're familiar with is the story of Noah and the ark. When Noah was on the ark, and they had been on the waters for many days after the great flood, and he thought the waters were about to abate, he sent out a raven, and a raven is the first species of bird that's mentioned in the Bible. And according to the Bible story, the flood happened, and when he sent the raven out, the raven didn't return. And the Bible's explanation for this is that the raven is a carrion eater. That is, it eats dead things, and it could land on things that were dead and floating on the water, and it could eat them and thus find something to eat, and it didn't return to the ark. And that's true. Ravens eat things that are dead, and it didn't come back. We don't have ravens in Arkansas. We have crows, which are in the same family of birds, corvids. Then Noah sent out a dove, according to the song, according to the Bible story. we're familiar in Arkansas with a song that was written, I think, and sung by Jimmy Brown, who was a country singer from here in Arkansas. I was going to try to sing that song for you. I'm not, I'm not very much of a singer, but you may remember he sings, on the wings of a snow white dove, God sent his pure, sweet love, song from above, on the wings of a dove. And then there's a verse that says, when Noah had drifted many days, he searched for land in various ways. Then it goes on that God sent his love on the wings of a snow white dove. Well, the Bible doesn't say it was on the wings of a snow white dove, but it does say that it was a dove that God sent, that Noah sent out of the ark. But if the Bible story is true, it was probably this dove that he sent out. The Bible story probably took place, if there was a great flood, it was along the Mesopotamian Tigris-Euphrates River. And this is the dove that's most common there. It's the Eurasian dove. And that might have been the dove that a stranded person from a flood in that area might have on his boat and would release and would come back to him. You can read about that in Genesis, the 8th chapter. That bird, incidentally, is in Arkansas now. It's not native to this state, but it is today. There's another Bible story of Joseph when he was in the prison in Egypt, and he interpreted a dream of a man who was in prison with him. And this man had dreamt that he was released from prison and that he was found guilty of a crime. He was actually a baker for the Pharaoh, and that he was hung. He was hung, and when he was hung, why, the birds, and it says some versions of the Bible call it the blackbirds. Other versions of the Bible say it was the vultures, and other versions of the Bible say it was the buzzards came and ate his eyes out when he was hanged. And this is the hooded vulture that is in Africa that would have been in Egypt and would have eaten a man's eyes out as he was hung. And we know today that when vultures feed on the dead person, as disgusting as it might sound, that's what vultures do. They eat the eyes and the orifices of the human body first. And so when the Bible describes the behavior of this bird, it's exactly as the behavior of this bird that we observe today. And you read about that bird behavior in Genesis, the 40th chapter. There's another story in Genesis, not in Genesis, but in the Old Testament, about the children of Israel when they were wandering in the wilderness and they had nothing to eat. God caused to have an influx of a great coveys of quail to come and fly about them, and they could very easily kill these quail and eat them, and God provided for them to eat. And when quail are in great numbers like that, they're relatively easy to capture and kill with traps. And this is not a quail that is in that area. This is a gamble quail that is in the western part of the United States. Actually, I took this picture from a friend of mine's mantle. He had these birds stuffed, perched on a log, but they're mentioned in the quails are mentioned in the Bible. And then ravens are mentioned again in 1 Kings during a drought when Elijah had nothing to eat or to drink. Ravens came and fed Elijah as he was by a brook during a very hard time. Now, another large section of many birds were mentioned, and perhaps the birdiest section of the Bible was the section where there were certain dietary restrictions on the Jews in the Old Testament. There were certain birds that they could eat and certain birds that they could not eat. Now, we wouldn't think of eating some of these birds today, but of course, all over the world, almost every bird is eaten by some people. This is one bird that's mentioned that the Jews could not eat in Leviticus 11:13. It's a bittern. Now, bittern is a bird they could not eat, and we have bittern here in Arkansas. It's probably the biggest bird in Arkansas that you've never seen. It's a bird almost as large as a turkey, but it hides in swamps and sloughs and in grass, and it hides itself very, very well. And even though I'm an avid bird watcher, I haven't seen them very often. And this is the first one I ever saw, and I was lucky to have my camera with me when I saw it, and it took up in flight. But you couldn't eat bittern, but there's a hunting season on bittern, I've read. But I don't know how you'd find very many to hunt. So people may eat them yet. And you couldn't eat an eagle according to Leviticus 13. But eagles can eat anything. Here's a picture I took of an eagle over on Lake Washita, and he's eating on a coot. And the Bible says you can't eat pelicans, and it calls a pelican by name. This is a brown pelican. And you couldn't eat a nighthawk. Now, those of us here in Garland County, we really like the nighthawk. The nighthawk is the mascot of our local junior college. And the nighthawk's in the same family of birds as the whippoorwill. And you couldn't eat herons. There are a lot of herons, different kinds of herons, but they were not edible. Or cormorants. Cormorant's a very interesting bird in that people used it for fishing. They could tie a string around its neck and let it go and let it dive under the water and catch a fish. And they could eat the fish the cormorant could catch, but they couldn't eat the cormorant. You couldn't eat owls. And they couldn't eat the hoopoe bird. Now, the hoopoe bird is the national bird of Israel today, just like the eagle is our national bird. And the hoopoe bird is in the same family of birds as is this bird that you'll recognize as the roadrunner. Now, the Bible does not mention a roadrunner, but the Bible has a very interesting kind of language that it uses, where it says you can't eat of the hoopoe or after its kind, or after the hoopoe's kind. And I understand that to mean that you couldn't eat birds in the same family as the hoopoe, and that would include the roadrunner. Now, coyotes don't have trouble eating roadrunners, I gather, and you couldn't eat kites. Kite is a kind of hawk. We have the Mississippi kite in this country, and I'm not sure what kinds of kites they had in Israel, but there are several kinds of kites. I took this picture of this kite in Lone Oak. And they could not eat swans. This picture was taken out at the fish hatchery here in Garland County. And the Bible mentions that you couldn't eat this bird. It's called some versions call it the lapwing, and some call it the jackdaw. But it's the same bird. This is a bird of Israel. We don't have this bird in the United States. They could not eat osprey. They could not eat ostrich. Took this picture at the St. Louis Zoo. They could not eat falcon or hawks of any kind. They could not eat cranes, although there are abundance of cranes in northern Israel. Nor could they eat gulls. There are many different kinds of gulls. They couldn't eat any of them. They couldn't eat vultures. I read an article just after we started with the pandemic that when the smallpox pandemic of 1820 began, that the religious shaman of the Cherokee Indians taught that as a cure for smallpox, the Indians should try to eat the flesh of a vulture as a way of curing the smallpox. Of course, that didn't work. And I was reminded that the Bible had told people years ago not to eat of the flesh of the vulture. They couldn't eat storks, and they couldn't eat cuckoos. A lot of people think cuckoo's just a silly word, but there's a bird called a cuckoo. It's not just a bird carved for a clock. We have the yellow-billed cuckoo here in Arkansas a lot during the summer. And this is a picture I took, taken one. I hear cuckoos calling from my house near the library here every summer. Now let's want to talk about birds as object lessons. The Bible, in addition to using the birds as sort of actors, the Bible talks about birds as a way for us to learn something about how we ought to behave and sort of moral instruction. One of the ways is Jesus told his disciples, he says, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and be as harmless as doves." Doves are very harmless creatures. They're the first creatures probably to be tamed by mankind. When it tells you to be harmless, I was reminded of this particular dove. It's called a peaceful dove. It's a dove from Australia. A friend of mine took this picture. It's not mine. I photographed this bird, but this is not my photograph. Jesus also reminded people, "Are not two sparrows sold for a farthing? If one falls to the ground, your Father knows it." He was trying to teach the people that birds seem worthless to us, but that God cares for them and watches after them. Sparrows are abundant, and they seem to be the least pretentious of all of God's creatures, but God looks after them. And that sort of reminds us that we're under God's protection. And that seems to be the message that the Bible's teaching in that instance to me. In that same connection, he says, if one falls, that is a sparrow falls or a bird falls, your Father knows it. This is a photograph of a robin that has fallen from a nest. Occasionally a bird will fall from the sky, but most typical is birds that fall, or small birds that fall out of the nest. If a bird falls out of its nest, there are some things you should do. It's an old wives' tale to say that if you touch it, your smell will get on it and the bird will not be accepted. That's probably not true. But if a bird falls, like this robin fell on my patio, the mother bird or the father bird is nearby and knows it and will be looking after that bird. The best thing for you can do is to make sure the neighborhood cat and the dog doesn't get it. You might set it up into a bush where the parent bird can still feed it and take care of it. Nature has a way of caring for these unfortunate birds that fall out. And they really don't need our protection. And finally, birds are somewhat in the Bible given as a symbol of the deity. And that's used very frequently in both the Old and the New Testament. The eagle is frequently used in the Bible as a symbol of God or the Father. If you accept the notion of the Trinity, which many Christians do, God is sort of presented as an eagle in Exodus 19:4, where he leads the children of Israel out of Egypt, and the psalmist David talks about that. He's portrayed as an eagle, like this one I saw on Lake Washita. Those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up their wings like eagles, they are told in Isaiah 40:31. And then also in the book of the Psalms, God the Son is sort of represented as a chicken. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. So said the psalmist David in Psalms 91 and 4. And then Jesus repeated that passage in Luke 13:34 when he said, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often have I longed to gather you as children, as a hen doth gather her chicks, but you were not willing." It sort of represents the love of God as a chicken who would gather chicks and care for them under his wings. And then when Jesus was baptized, it's sort of the Spirit, the third part of the Trinity, the Spirit is dove-like. In Matthew 3:16 we read, as Jesus was baptized, he went out of the water, and at that moment heaven was open, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and lighting on him. Matthew 3:16. So we can see that it's abundance. So this is the Bible. That's the look at the book. Let's see. I'm going to try to get back here to my friend. To my friend Paul.
I'm here, Jerry. Can you see me?
Yeah, I can. Have anybody made any inquiries or comments about what bird might be associated?
Well, and a reminder to the audience, if you're watching on either Facebook or YouTube, you can comment. And we did have Gavin who said dove.
Yeah. Right. Well, good. Well, I should have reminded people earlier. Gavin was a pretty bright feller, because dove is the bird that's mentioned most frequently in the Bible. What time do you have, Paul? How much more time do we
have? It's 4:40, just about.
So we've been about 20 minutes. Well, we don't have a lot to finish up in here, but since we've already looked at the book, and then we'll look at the bird then, and we'll look at let's see. I need to go back to Chrome here.
No, you'll go back to your PowerPoint down there at the bottom.
Okay. And as Gavin mentioned, the dove is the bird that is most frequently mentioned in the Bible. And this is a pair of doves. These are mourning doves. We see them here in Arkansas. They're most frequently recognized by that sharp point on their tail. You see them perched on power lines almost everywhere. In the Bible, they're called doves, and sometimes they're called pigeons or turtle doves in the Bible. But these terms generally refer to the same family of birds. They're called, as scientifically, the Columbidae today. There are more than 300 species of birds exist. They populate every landmass on the planet except Antarctica. And we don't have time to look at all the 300 doves that exist. We're going to look at some of them, We'll look first at the ones that are most common in our area, and then some of them that are sort of different and unique other places. This is that sharp-tailed one that you saw first, the mourning dove. It's the most common dove in Arkansas. If you'll notice that eye ring around its eye, it's a deep blue. During mating season and breeding season, it turns deep blue, and that's kind of an unusual feature. You might notice them unless you get up really close. And then the other is, of course, the pigeon or the rock pigeon. This is a photograph of my grandmother when she was in London. And the pigeons, she loved birds and she loved to feed them. And she enjoyed this. She's gone now, but it's one of my favorite pictures of her. And the rock pigeons is one of the most abundant birds on the planet. They're very easily tamed. Here's a rock pigeon, not in London, but I took this picture. He was on the roof of our bathhouse row here in Hot Springs. This is the Eurasian dove. It's the one that I was telling you that I thought would likely land on a boat if it was on a flood on the over in Mesopotamia on Euphrates River if Noah had been there. This bird isn't normally in America, and when another dove that was native to America, the passenger pigeon, is now extinct. This Eurasian dove was brought here and is now becoming seen here often. It's sort of assumed the biological niche that the passenger pigeon had, and it seems to be holding on pretty good and not impacting our other species of birds. And I think that's the reason. It's because it's just assuming a different biological niche. This is what's called a common ground dove, and actually it's not all that common, although it once was very common in Arkansas and in much of the southern part of the United States. You can see them a lot in Texas and in Mexico. They may be common. I think probably one of the things that's hurt them is they're a ground nesting bird, and cats and feral cats have been very destructive to them. They're very small. They're a sparrow-sized dove. But when we call them common doves, that's probably a misnomer. And this is another dove that's about the size of that common ground dove. It's a little bit bigger. It's called the Inca dove, and I guess it was named because it's numerous down in where the Inca Indians were, but it has scale-like feathers. It almost looks like it's wearing armor, and those feathers are sort of stiff if you pick one of them up. But I photographed this bird in Arkansas, down in South Arkansas, and they're here from time to time, but not in great numbers. And this one is also seen occasionally in Arkansas. I've seen it over in Little Rock on one occasion, and there's a group of them that appear regularly up in Fort Smith. This one was seen in Texas. It's a good-sized bird, almost as big as a crow. Not quite. It's noticed by its striking white wings. This is a colorful dove, perhaps the most colorful dove. It's in the Mariana Islands, It's a fruit dove. And this dove has been captured and bred in captivity and is kept and held in gardens in warm temperatures. Not as a caged bird, but as held in botanical gardens and in zoos, and can be seen. I think I took this photograph in a zoo somewhere. And this is the peaceable dove. I first saw this dove in Hawaii, and I took this photograph at Pearl Harbor. I thought it was interesting to think of Pearl Harbor as a place of peace. That's where I first saw it. It's also called a zebra dove because of those black and white feathers. And this is a spotted dove. On that trip I took to Hawaii, I took my camera, and when I crawled off the airplane and was walking through the airport, this is the first Hawaiian bird I saw. Spotted dove. He was on a fountain there at the airport. And this unusual bird is sheepmaker's crown pigeon. I think it's native to either New Zealand or Australia, or maybe both of those places. And you can see this bird at the Little Rock Zoo. This is the last dove I'm going to show you. Since it's close to Easter, I thought I'd show you this one. It's called a bleeding heart dove. It was saved from extinction in part, I think, because of a biblical legend. The legend had it that this bird was at the site of the crucifixion, and it landed near Christ, and the blood from the crucifixion fell down on and stained its breast. And of course, then it remained. And since this is the Easter period, I thought this would be an interesting bird to live on. That's a biblical legend. That's not from the Bible, but that's what has happened, though, that birds have been associated with legend and religion and associated with it. There may be others that I am not familiar with that you may hear, and I suggest you approach and inquire your religious leaders and your cultural traditions, and you may find some others that are interesting. This legend, though, makes this bird sort of special, and it's native to and endemic, I think, to the island of Luzon. And because people have found this legend so compelling, they've kept this bird, and this bird now is extinct on the island of Luzon, but people have carried it all over the world, and so it's been saved from extinction or near extinction. And perhaps someday it can be allowed to repopulate that island and help us with our biodiversity worldwide. Well, that's all I had to say about the Bible and the bird. But look at what next. Next, we're going to be looking at the grail bird, and we're going to be hot on the trail of the ivory-billed woodpecker. We have that scheduled for June the 23rd. That's a little bit ways off, and may have to change that date, but that's the date we're hoping to have, and we're going to have some very interesting people who may have been in on the search for the ivory-billed woodpecker back 15 years ago over in East Arkansas. Now, the other two books that we've looked at, the Bible and James Audubon's book, it wasn't quite so necessary that you read it, but let me encourage you to come to the library and check The Grail Bird by Tim Gallagher out. I think the library has several copies of that, and you can read it, or maybe you can get a copy and read it and have some questions. I hope we can have a little more audience reaction and not so much talk from me. We'll have multiple people who have been looking for this bird. We'll be learning about the ivory-billed woodpecker. So there's no doubt about what the bird will be. And this is the book. But we've still got a couple of other programs that we'll be looking for. And these are some books that are under consideration. And we need your help in helping us choose what books we're going to be talking about. We may look at the works of Shakespeare. H is for Hawk. The Song of the Dodo is a book about extinction. It's a very good book. It's a scientific book. Kingbird Highway and The Big Year and Birding Without Borders, three of these books here deal with looking at birds and trying to see as many birds as you can. And The Genius of Birds talks about how clever birds are. Migrations is a novel. We haven't looked at a novel yet, but that would be interesting. H is for Hawk is a biography of Helen McDonald, and she's a woman who was a falconer who trained a goshawk, and she tells her story. Where the Crawdads Sing is a very popular current book that many people will like. And if you haven't read Where the Crawdads Sing, it's a delightfully well-told story by a new writer who's received a lot of publicity and tells a great story. And I understand they've made a movie out of it, as they have with the Big Year, Mark Obasmek's book. So look at those things. If you'd like to hear a discussion of those, let us know. Help us choose one of these books. Cast your vote by contacting the library or the Garland County Audubon Society. Or if you don't, not so interested in a book, but there's a bird you want to talk about, choose one of these birds. Maybe it's owls or bobolinks or eagles or parrots or geese. Just let us know what bird you want to look at. Some of these books that we talk about, we can choose any bird. So if you're interested in sparrows, you let us know. Till we meet again to talk of books and birds, I'm Jerry Butler. I'm your host. Wishing you peace and birds and good reading and good day.
Well, Jerry, you ready for some questions?
Yeah. Let me get back to you. Now, how do I do that? Hit escape.
Hit escape and then click that Google Chrome tab down there at the bottom.
All righty.
You got it. Yep. And then we got a couple questions in the comments from Tony, and then I did get some over email.
Okay.
I'll start with those over email first.
Okay.
First one is, do you know if other religious texts other than the Christian Bible use birds in their symbolism?
Yes, I do. I know some of the Eastern religions use birds quite a bit. I'm not sure of all of those texts. I haven't read them. The Koran does not encourage the translation of it into English. And although I have read in the Koran, I haven't discovered any bird symbols in them, but I haven't read deeply in it. So there may be some there, but I'm not aware of them.
What is the significance of birds to the Christian theology overall?
Well, I think the dove has a lot of significance. in the terms of its symbolism towards peace and kindness and gentleness towards Christianity. I believe that's the main symbolism that we see. But I think if we delve deeply into the birds and try to extract some meanings, I think that can have some deeper meaning within any particular religious group.
Do you feel it's important for people to study the birds and the symbolism in religious text, whether they themselves are religious or not, and why?
Well, I think it is. I think now, since I'm a Christian, I think I can understand the Bible a little bit better if I understand birds a little bit better. Like when you read and you know something about quail, and you've eaten a few quail, you realize what a great treat it was when God provided quail for the children of Israel when they were in the wilderness and they wanted something good to eat. Man, quail are just about as delicious a dinner fare as you can have. And so when God gave them all the quail they wanted to eat, what a treat that was. And it's just a little bit richer understanding if you know a little bit more about the bird. It's the science and the Bible, and it seems like it makes both of them richer.
Can't say I've ever tried quail, but
Oh, you really ought to try it.
Do you think it's possible that birds were so frequently used symbolically because flight was seen as something as a miracle at the time, and it may have been used as a parallel for angels?
Well, I have thought, and I even thought about mentioning so many, although the Bible mentions many times uh, winged creatures had spiritual significance. In the book of Revelation, many of the spiritual creatures, the seraphim and the angels and the archangels, were very frequently described as winged creatures. And I think it sort of signifies that these birds were numerous. And I think part of the fact that I believe had the Bible been written in a country where there weren't so many birds, it wouldn't have been so important to that religion. And I think it might be significant that there are more birds mentioned in the Bible than there are animals. And there might be some significance that there are more birds mentioned in the Bible than there are trees. And I think that's, I'm not sure what that is, but I think it's just an interesting area of inquiry.
We had a couple other questions from Tony in the comments. He says, birds don't, the phrase sow nor reap comes up often. What is the consensus on what this means?
Well, that's a good question. That's a real good question, Tony. When it says that birds neither sow nor reap, I think it means that the birds don't have to care, that their substance, they don't have to raise a garden, they don't have to plan for the future, that their environment, the world is for them, that they fly to where food is available, the trees come of season for them to eat, and God provides for them. And I think in our religion, where God tells us not to worry, that there's a certain element of us to have trust in God and not to worry. I think that's the significance of that. That's a good question.
He also asked, is the Hawaiian bird only found there?
That peaceable dove in Hawaii, I'm not sure what bird he was talking. If he's talking about that peaceable dove, no, that's not just found there. It's uh, it's a bird I think that's native to Australia and New Zealand, and it's been transported to to, to Hawaii. And the same thing is true with that spotted dove and that white dove that I mentioned was in Hawaii. All three of those are not native, are not endemic to Hawaii. They're all three there, but they're not endemic there. They have been brought to the islands.
And then there was also a question about conservation. He says, considering evolution is a constant process at any time in life's history, we would find animals that have moved on into something more suitable for their environment. So are the species that aren't being artificially eradicated by us of any real importance?
Are they of real importance?
I think the ones that go extinct naturally, as opposed to from man causes, is how I'm interpreting his question.
Well, I, I think they're. I think we need to learn from them. I mean, it's. I think it's natural. I think for species to go extinct. Some in some point in the future, I think Homo sapiens will become extinct, and maybe that will naturally happen. And I, 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 I sort of don't look forward to that point in history. So no, I don't like the prospects of human beings becoming extinct, but it's a natural process of the world, and I think biodiversity is good, and you know, I don't know I don't know how to say it. I think it's a natural thing. It's sort of like asking, is death good? Well, it happened,
Well, we'll end on a fun note. I got a question from Whitney, who asked, why do they release doves at weddings?
That's a good question, Whitney. Because some guy who sells those doves convinced them that it's a good idea. It's okay. Just it's like releasing balloons or throwing rice. Um, it's sort of a pretty thing to do to see those doves fly away. A lot of those doves are recaptured and released at other weddings. I might say that releasing doves or releasing birds has been a religious act in a lot of places. And worldwide, the capture and release of birds from captivity is a kind of prayer in some of Eastern religions. And if you go to Jerusalem today, you can buy a sparrow and take it to certain places of worship and release it with your prayer. And then behind the building, there are people who will capture that sparrow and sell it to a next person who offer another prayer with it.
Got another question just in. Does rice really kill doves?
It doesn't kill them, but it's not good food for them.
And then one last thing, Tony responded back to your answer about extinction. He said he likes that answer. Live our current lives to the fullest.
Good. Well, thank you, Tony. I'm glad you liked the answer.
All right. Well, that's all we have. Thank you, as always, Mr. Butler.
Okay.
Like you said, our next program will be in June on the ivory-billed woodpecker. And thank you for your time. Any last things you'd like to say?
Peace and birds.
Right back at you. Have a good day.
Good day.